more on this is investigative journalist Gerald Posner. He's the author of Case Closed, Lee Harvey Oswald and the JFK Assassination. Gerald, thanks so much for being here. Got to ask you, what do you make of Paul Landis' story?
I think it has to be taken seriously, Elizabeth. There's no question. I mean, as you said in the lead, he was there. He was on the car right behind the president. So he has a recollection. It's 60 years later. Memory's fungible. But I'm assuming that he's telling the truth when he says he grabbed the bullet. And I'm assuming that that is the bullet that was knocked off a gurney later by the chief engineer at Parkland Hospital. He says he put it on JFK's stretcher. And now he says, well, maybe it rolled over to Conley's stretcher. I think he actually has provided the evidence after all these years as to how the single bullet ended up falling off a gurney after the president's body was taken back to Washington.
But how, if he says he found the bullet in the seat where President Kennedy was sitting, how could the bullet go through Kennedy to the governor's seat in front of him and then back to Kennedy's seat? That makes no sense.
Right. No, but all anybody had to see was the absolute rush and panic that took place. And you can imagine this. The president is coming in almost mortally wounded to Parkland. The governor of Texas is wounded, and they don't know how badly. Secret Service and hospital orderlies are bringing gurneys and stretchers out to the limousine, and they are taking those two men out in a fashion that would not be considered gentle. They're turning the governor, who is tall, around. They're trying to manipulate him from the seat to the side. That wound, which is in his left thigh, the bullet is not very deeply in. If it popped out inside that car, how it ends up on the back seat, I don't know. But let's assume that Landis is telling the truth. The question is, that's the bullet he found. Now, forget for a second whether it was one of the worst errors of judgment not to turn it in that day, the bullet that, has just been used possibly in killing the president of the United States. But that aside, I know everybody's spinning this to say, well, it probably is the end of the single bullet theory. And to me, it actually provides the answer for me as to how the bullet is found later that day. But maybe that's too simple for a lot of people.
Landis was assigned to protect First Lady Jackie Kennedy, so he was just feet away. But he was never called to testify before the Warren Commission. Why?
There were 22 Secret Service agents, believe it or not, assigned to the Dallas routine. 12 of them, like Landis, Clint Hill, and others, were actually on the cars and in the motorcade that day, and only 5 of them ended up testifying to the Warren Commission. So they all gave statements. Landis, in particular, had given a statement 4 days after the assassination. It's single-spaced, typewritten, 2 pages. And then he gives one 7 days, only a week after the assassination, detailed recall, 7 pages long, never mentions the bullet or anything else. So the Warren Commission lawyers looked at those statements. They decided which ones they were calling. Landis, it wasn't unusual not to talk to them. Most of them didn't get called.
He said in his statement, which, by the way, he memorialized the events of that day just 4 days after the assassination while his memory was fresh. But in that detailed statement, he said that he thought he heard 2 shots. And in the book, he's now saying he believes he heard 3 shots.
Yeah. I don't think memory gets better over time, but even with the 2 shots, I don't put a lot into that for the following reason. I mean, I've looked at this case for a number of years. As you know, I wrote about it in a book 30 years ago.
Right.
I went through all the ear witnesses, and the ear witnesses vary. Dealey Plaza is like an echo chamber. So some say 3, some say 4, some say 5. Very few said 2 or fewer. So he was in a minority, no question about that. But I don't give a lot of credence to that. So he heard 2 originally. He might have been wrong. Remember, he was up to 5 a.m. the morning before, at a club in Dallas, which he and several other Secret Service agents have talked about since. They didn't drink, they said, but they were up late. He was the last to leave at 5 a.m. He got a couple of hours sleep, so he may have been a little more tired than he was on a normal Secret Service assignment. I don't give a lot to the 2 and 3 bullets and the changes. So
do you think it was fatigue and the chaos and incredible trauma of that day that may have, because he not only said he heard 2 shots, way back when, he said that in his statement to the Warren Commission, he said one of the shots seemed to come from the grassy knoll area.
Yeah, he says one comes from the grassy knoll. Now he says in his new statement he thinks they all come from behind. So again, I'm not going to base where the shots came from. I think there's better evidence for that. The Zapruder film, the so-called home movie of the assassination, and the autopsy photographs and x-rays of the president to let you know where those shots came from, all from behind. But what I think is important with Landis is that he has a kernel of truth here. very possibly in picking up the bullet, and then before they leave the hospital, he decides in this moment of rash decision he's going to put it somewhere, and he puts it on a stretcher. But there are embellishments in the story, such as him saying that he's in the trauma room where JFK is being treated, and I hope you ask him about that on Wednesday.
I will.
Yeah, and the Secret Service agent who was guarding the door there and not letting anyone in, recounts no one else being there. The doctors and the nurses and the medical attendants say no other Secret Service agent in except for William Greer. So I think that over the years, his memory has confabulated some other elements. He probably believes them to be true, but I think they're contradicted by the other witnesses. If you strip out the embellishments, the things like being in the trauma room, placing the bullet on JFK's stretcher at a time when other people were looking, then I think that you get back to that underlying story. He made a rash decision to put the bullet in his pocket, walked around with it for a while, didn't tell anyone, and before they're leaving the hospital, put it on a stretcher. Not the greatest moment for the Secret Service, but one now is big news.
Yeah, and I got to be honest, it's resurrecting and raising all these. There's a headline right now in Vanity Fair saying a new JFK revelation could upend the long-held lone gunman theory. So it just,
look at the Daily Mail. Daily Mail's known for its headlines. They never go very subtle. But they had, JFK bombshell. The entire case was changed. And I think that, something like this, we've been waiting for documents to come out of the National Archives. That's not very exciting. You run through the papers. This is exciting in the sense you have a person who was there telling you a story that no one's heard before. And I must say, it's totally shocking to me because no one had heard this beforehand. This really was out of the blue, that a Secret Service agent would find a bullet, hold it, put it in their pocket, and later put it down again and not tell anyone for 60 years is rather remarkable to imagine, but that's what we're hearing, and some of it may be true.
Yeah, well, on Wednesday, I will be joined by Paul Landis himself, and we'll ask him all those questions. And discuss his book, The Final Witness, and his stunning revelations that, I don't know, is obviously changing some people's minds. All right, Gerald Posner, thanks so much for being with us. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise.
Thank you. I'll be watching Wednesday.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
Coming up, an unthinkable nightmare becoming increasingly